The highway code was updated on the 29th of January 2022, and in this video I'm going to be primarily focusing on the rules that affect drivers. I'm also going to give an opinion on one of the rules which I think is a bad move. I'm going to address a couple of news articles which have made the rules sound different to how they actually are, and I have a note from the driving test centre on how these rules will affect the test. Firstly, I'm going to jump into the big one, the most important change there is: people crossing the road at junctions. At a junction, you should, I'll come back to that word in a bit, give way to pedestrians crossing or waiting to cross a road into which or from which you are turning. This rule is causing confusion and danger because it says junction. It doesn't specify what kind of junction. Many people are assuming a T-junction and that you only have to give way to pedestrians crossing from here to here. But some other people are assuming all kinds of other junctions. And also, when it says into which or from which in that paragraph, that could mean this car is turning into this road, so it needs to give way to pedestrians crossing from here to here. But you could also interpret that as this car is turning into this road, so it needs to give way to pedestrians crossing from here to here. I'm making this video on the 10th of February 2022, and if anyone claims they know exactly what this paragraph means, then they're making a big assumption of what the highway code means by junction. It's not fair on pedestrians, it's not fair on drivers, and it's definitely not fair on people taking their driving test because everyone is interpreting this paragraph differently. There is actually a picture in the highway code. This is rule H2. This paragraph is taken from the new H2 rule. There's a picture of a T-junction, but it's 7 paragraphs below the paragraph I've just read. And even if that image was directly below this paragraph, there should still be text specifying what junctions they mean in the rule. This is precisely why I'm late making this video. The rules come into effect on the 29th of January and I wanted to make a video before then, but I couldn't believe they were actually going to go ahead and change the rules without them specifying and being more clear about what junctions they were talking about. And it's causing danger. Even today, I was at a set of traffic lights, red light, the lights turned green and a pedestrian walked in front of me as the lights turned green, stopping the cars. This was on a dual carriageway, a 40-mile-an-hour dual carriageway with a total of 5 lanes. But as far as the pedestrian is concerned, they're doing the right thing. The pedestrian was thanking the drivers because he knows that is a junction and he's been told that cars should give way to pedestrians at junctions. Another big problem with this new rule is that up until now, or the 29th of January, it's always been advised that you don't give way to pedestrians waiting to cross the road because you shouldn't encourage pedestrians to cross the road. You shouldn't pressure them into crossing the road because it's not as safe. Someone could be coming the other way. It's better just to carry on, and when there's space, then they can cross. I've actually had quite a few people fail for doing this because learners usually like to give way, and when they see someone waiting to cross the road, they think, oh, I better let them cross first because I'm a little bit worried about them. Then they fail their driving test, and then the examiner says you failed because it wasn't necessary to give way. You stopped the flow of traffic, which wasn't safe. But I guess now stopping the flow of traffic is safe. And I'm talking about situations where my pupil who has failed a test didn't brake hard, they didn't slam on the brakes, they broke gently, yet they still failed the test. Now they're being advised to do just what they failed for. I want to go back to the word should in this paragraph. In the highway code, there are 2 main kinds of rules. There are must rules, which could be must or must not. They're backed up by law. And if you break one of those rules, you can be prosecuted, fined, whatever the punishment is. And then there are should and do rules, which can be should, should not, do, do not. They are not backed up by law. And if you were to break one of those rules, you can't be prosecuted for breaking just that rule. However, if something bad was to happen or you were to find yourself in court and it can be proven that you broke a should or a do rule, that can be held against you as supporting evidence to determine liability. At the moment, I'm assuming that we only have to give way to pedestrians who are waiting to cross a T-junction or a Y-junction, which is essentially a T-junction but a bit wonky, from here to here. But until this rule is properly specified and clear, and we're all singing from the same book, there's going to be problems. It also says if they have started to cross, they have priority, so give way. That makes sense. If a pedestrian has started crossing the road, it's better to give them priority and let them finish. You don't want to be driving at pedestrians who are in the road. That's always been the case. That certainly was the case when I learned to drive back in 2004, and I'm sure long before then also. Moving on to zebra crossings now. You should, it's another should rule, give way to pedestrians waiting to cross a zebra crossing and to pedestrians and cyclists waiting to cross a parallel crossing. If you don't know what a parallel crossing is, it's basically just a zebra crossing but with a cycle lane next to it, and cyclists do have priority, cars do need to give way to them. This is a little bit different because before you only had to wait for pedestrians once they stepped foot in the road, but now it's saying you should give way to them when they're waiting. To be honest, that's how I've always taught people. That's how most people drive. If someone's waiting to cross at a zebra crossing, you give way. You don't wait until they step foot in the crossing. So that is a good addition there. You must, so this is a must rule, you must give way when a pedestrian has moved onto the crossing. So yes, legally, by law, if a pedestrian is on the crossing, the zebra crossing, you must give way to them. This is not a new rule, but it's an important one now that you're being encouraged to give way to pedestrians who are waiting to cross the road, which is why I'm going to make a point of it. Do not, so it's a do not rule, do not wave, flash your lights or use your horn to invite pedestrians across. This could be dangerous if another vehicle is approaching, and that is true. If a pedestrian is waiting to cross the road and you encourage them or hurry them up by waving them or flashing your lights, they're less likely to check properly to make sure it's safe. They're more likely to think, oh, that car's waiting for me, I better cross. But in my opinion, stopping a car to give way without waving your arms or flashing your lights is just as much pressure. They still feel like you're waiting for them, so they still feel pressured to cross the road and maybe rush a little bit. Which is why this new rule of giving way to pedestrians who are waiting to cross the road goes against what I have been taught and what I have been teaching for many years, and that is not to encourage pedestrians to walk in the road. I'm now going to move on to the next biggest change for drivers, and this note is actually directed at cyclists, but it's very important to know as a driver. And it says, if you're going straight ahead at a junction, so it's saying as a cyclist, if you're going straight ahead at a junction, you have priority over traffic waiting to turn into or out of the side road. So what the highway code is saying, if I am turning left or right at the end of this road, out of this side road here, and I'm waiting, if a cyclist was to pass me on the left or the right, I should give them priority. And it's also saying that if I'm turning into a side road and I'm having to wait, say there's a queue of cars in front of me here and I want to turn left and I can't quite make it to this road on the left, I should give way to any cyclists who are passing me on the left before I make my turn. And if I'm turning right and I'm waiting for oncoming cars and there's a cyclist passing me on the right, I should give way to them also before I make my turn. This is why it's so important to check the relevant mirrors when you're turning left or right, so if somebody is passing you, you will notice and you can avoid a collision. But if I'm slowing down to turn into a side road and I see a cyclist behind me, I'm not going to actively give way to them. I'm going to keep my eye on them and make sure if they try to come past me, I'm not going to hit them. But I'm not going to wait for them to go past and encourage them to go past when they're following me. I expect them to stay behind when I'm in motion. This is where some news articles have been misleading people about these changes in the highway code. I have two snippets here from two different articles, well-known sources of news in the UK. I'm not going to say who they are because they're very big and powerful and could make my life hell if they wanted to. But if I said who they were and you're in the UK, you would know who they are because they're very well known. Here we go. Here's the first one. Cars indicating to turn left or right will also have to give way to cyclists coming from behind and going straight on, only turning once they have passed. So that snippet there makes it sound like cars have to give way to all cyclists behind, regardless if the car is moving or not. Whereas the highway code clearly says to cyclists, you have priority over traffic waiting to turn into or out of a side road. Waiting, not in motion. Another article, but from today, cars turning left or right on the road will have to give way to any cyclists that are behind them and planning to go straight on. Again, no mention of waiting traffic. Waiting traffic or traffic waiting are the words used in the highway code. If we start encouraging cyclists behind to go in front of cars as they're about to do a junction and they're in motion, that's dangerous. What's in front should stay in front, and what's behind should stay behind as much as possible when driving in flow. You don't want people trying to swap round, particularly at junctions. I'm not saying you should turn into cyclists at junctions. I'm saying if you're slowing down towards a junction and you see a cyclist behind, you don't have to stop and let them go past first. Keep your eye on them. If it looks like they're trying to get up alongside you and pass you, don't hit them. If you're in stop-start moving traffic though, expect cyclists to be passing you on both sides. That's part of the advantage of riding a bicycle. You get to filter through the traffic. And it's always been the case that if you're in traffic, if you're about to turn, you check your mirrors first to make sure no one's passing you before you make your turn. If you see a cyclist coming, let them go first. Here are some more updates, but I think you're probably doing this anyway. This is certainly how I've been teaching people to drive before this was written down in the code. As a guide, leave at least 1.5 meters when overtaking cyclists at speeds of up to 30 miles an hour and give them more space when overtaking at high speeds. Yes, that's what I do. That's what I teach. As a guide, pass horse riders and horse-drawn vehicles at speeds under 10 miles an hour. I'm not sure if I go at 10 miles an hour or under 10 miles an hour, but it is slow when I pass a horse. I don't tend to look at the speedo. And allow at least 2 meters of space. Definitely, that's what you should be doing. Pass horses wide, slow, and quietly, because they do get startled. As a guide, allow at least 2 meters of space and keep to a low speed when passing a pedestrian who is walking in the road, for example, where there is no pavement. Definitely good advice there. You don't want to be near pedestrians. I always tell my pupils, give pedestrians, give cyclists enough room for them to fall over. If they fell over, we wouldn't hit them. That's how you know you're giving them enough room. Here is another update. Positioning in the road when cycling. On narrow sections of road, on quiet roads or streets, at junctions and in slower moving traffic, cyclists may, that's an important word here, may sometimes ride in the centre of the lane rather than towards the side of the road. It can be safer for groups of cyclists to ride two abreast in these situations. Allow them to do so for their own safety, to ensure they can see and be seen. Cyclists are also advised to ride at least a door's width or 1 metre from parked cars for their own safety. Again, this is where a news article has been misleading. I have a snippet of the article from a well-known source, and it says, cyclists must ride in the middle of the road instead of on the left-hand side. But of course, the highway code doesn't say that. It says, cyclists may sometimes ride in the centre of the lane. If you're wondering why it can be a good idea for a cyclist to cycle in the centre of the lane, it's because it makes them more visible to anyone wanting to pull out of a junction. It's the same as if they ride two abreast. The trouble is if you want to get past them, it's harder to give them the space, but cyclists should be taking this into account and they should be moving over and helping traffic flow when it's safe. But when it's not safe, going into the middle of the lane, which is known as the primary position, is something they've been doing for a long time anyway, but now it is written down in the code. This update is directed towards cyclists, but as a driver, I think it's important you know, and it's in relation to roundabouts. So for cyclists, if you are turning right, you can ride in the left or right hand lanes and move left when approaching your exit. That's been happening for years. Cyclists tend to use the left lane as they go all the way around roundabouts because they don't always feel confident enough going into the inside lane. As a driving instructor, that is something I point out to my pupils and tell them to be careful when they see cyclists on roundabouts because they may be using the wrong lane. It may look like they're leaving the roundabout, but in actual fact, they're coming round. Another update here, you should give priority to cyclists on the roundabout, the important word there being on. They will be travelling more slowly than motorised traffic. Give them plenty of room and do not attempt to overtake them within their lane. Allow them to move across your path as they travel around the roundabout. So let's dissect that a little bit. It says here you should give priority to cyclists on roundabouts. I've heard people think that that means that if you're going round a roundabout and a cyclist wants to move into the roundabout, that the cyclist should get priority, but that's not the case. If the cyclist is already on the roundabout, you should give them priority, as has always been the case. You give priority to traffic, which includes cyclists. Cyclists do count, which are already on the roundabout. It doesn't mean you have to give way to cyclists waiting to enter the roundabout. It says here, do not attempt to overtake them within their lane. Of course, if you're trying to overtake a cyclist within their own lane, you're not giving them enough space. It's okay to pass a cyclist if you're in a different lane to them and you've got enough distance, but you shouldn't be getting close to them. Allow them to move across your path as they travel around the roundabout. And yes, cyclists will need to change lane. They're going to be slower than a vehicle, so bear that in mind. They will, if they're in the right lane, need to probably move to the left lane before they leave. So try not to go around them, let them come across, let them exit the roundabout. There's another paragraph here which basically backs up the previous one. It says cyclists, horse riders and horse-drawn vehicles may stay in the left-hand lane when they intend to continue across or around the roundabout and should signal right to show they are not leaving the roundabout. Drivers should take extra care when entering a roundabout to ensure that they do not cut across cyclists, horse riders or horse-drawn vehicles in the left-hand lane who are continuing around the roundabout. Basically, it's just saying be warned, cyclists, horse riders, horse-drawn vehicles may use the left-hand lane of the roundabout when they're going all the way round. So if you see them in that lane, don't assume they're leaving, be careful, make sure they're leaving, or make sure you have time to pull out before them before you go. There's a new hierarchy of road users. I'll read out the first paragraph. Vehicles that can cause the greatest harm in the event of a collision bear the greatest responsibility to take care and reduce danger. In layman terms, what they're saying, if you're driving a bigger vehicle that can cause more harm, you are more responsible. It goes on to set out the hierarchy here. This principle applies most strongly to drivers of large goods and passenger vehicles. So that's trucks, lorries and passenger vehicles, buses. And then it's vans and minibuses. Then cars, taxis, and then motorcycles. Cyclists, horse riders and drivers of horse-drawn vehicles likewise have a responsibility to reduce danger to pedestrians. So pedestrians are right at the top of the hierarchy. They have the least responsibility, and large good vehicles have the most responsibility. What I find interesting though is vans are more responsible than cars, but cars can be more massive than vans. You can get a little Citroen Berlingo van that's 1.3 tonnes, then you can get a full-size Range Rover which is 2.6 tonnes. It's not actually ordering the hierarchy based on the first paragraph, which is greatest harm in the event of a collision. The class of vehicle doesn't matter, it's the mass. What about car versus car? What about a Fiat 500 versus a Range Rover that's 2.6 tonnes? 1 tonne Fiat 500. 2.6 tonne Range Rover. Should the driver of the Range Rover bear the greatest responsibility? Well, if that's what they're doing, I think that should be the case. It shouldn't be the class of vehicle, it should be the mass of the vehicle, because that's what's causing the, what they say here, greatest harm in the event of a collision. Last paragraph here. None of this detracts from the responsibility of all road users, including pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders, to have regard for their own safety and other road users' safety. What it's saying there is basically, we're dividing you up. We're saying you have the most responsibility, you have the least, and you're all in between, but we expect you all to behave responsibly, of course. But you can bet if you divide people up and say one group is more responsible and one group is less responsible, there's going to be some people who take advantage of it. Parking, charging and leaving vehicles. Where you are able to do so, you should open the door using your hand on the opposite side to the door you are opening. For example, use your left hand to open the door on your right hand side. That's known as the Dutch reach method. It's nothing new, and the idea behind it is that if you use your hand on the opposite side to your door to open the door, it takes two hands, by the way, to do this, which is less practical, but it forces you to twist in your seat to see who's coming. Also, another good point is that you are gripping the door when you open it, so if it's windy, oh, you've got hold of the door like that. I'll be honest, it's not something I do, partly because if I want to open this door with my left hand, it doesn't make me twist. I was looking at you while I did that. So I don't think it really makes me look, but also putting myself in that position to look doesn't help, because my head being that way, I'm switched off. If I'm not thinking about looking, I might not be looking anyway. I have to actually look myself deliberately to see who's coming. So telling you which hand you should use to open your door, health and safety going bananas in my opinion. I don't think we should be told to do that. And if most of the time it's impractical because you're holding something, and that method requires both hands, and you're going to be holding something when you get out of your car most of your time, if not just the key. So, however, if you feel it helps you see who's coming, makes you check to see who's coming, then by all means, it's a good idea. It then goes on to say this will make you turn your head to look over your shoulder. Well, that's what I've been saying. The idea is it makes you look round, but as I just showed you, I could do it without looking round. You are then more likely to avoid causing injury to cyclists or motorcyclists passing you on the road or people on the pavement. We have our first note about electric vehicles in the highway code. Let's see what it says. When using an electric vehicle charge point, you should park close to the charge point and avoid creating a trip hazard for pedestrians from trailing cables. So what that's saying is park close to the charging point so you don't have such a long cable. But in my head, I was imagining cars parked down the road with cables going from house across pavement to car. Hopefully that never happens, but if there's roadside charge points, that doesn't need to happen. So yeah, park near the charge point. Try not to have a longer length of trailing cable than you need to, just for it to be tidy if anything else, but obviously to avoid tripping people over. Display a warning sign if you can. What warning sign? I have never seen a warning sign for a car being on charge. Do they mean the little triangle you put out when you break down? How is that going to help? If we're all charging vehicles, we're all putting out warning signs. There's going to be warning signs everywhere. You're going to start ignoring warning signs pretty quickly. And the cable's massive. How can you miss the size of these charging cables? It's very obvious. After using the charge point, you should return charging cables and connectors neatly to minimise the danger to pedestrians and avoid creating an obstacle for other road users. Of course, don't just chuck the thing on the floor, put it back. If it's one of those ones you have to put in the boot of your car, wrap it up, put it in the boot of the car, or stuff it in the boot of the car if you like, I don't mind, doesn't matter. But yeah, you don't want to leave them on the floor. But then again, if someone's going to do that, they're going to do that anyway, even if you put this note in the highway code. I'm now going to go through the notes from the driving test centre. I'm not going to read them out. I'm going to copy and paste them in the description. I'm just going to abbreviate them and get to the gist of what they're trying to say. So they're saying the most notable change is that now you should give way to pedestrians waiting to cross at a junction. They haven't specified what they mean by junction though, so that's still open to interpretation. They also expect you to be looking out for people waiting to cross and understand what it looks like when they're crossing. There's even a paragraph here. Part of it says, if someone is waiting to cross, they'll normally be standing at the edge of the pavement. I'm sure you know that anyway. How is it going to be assessed on test? Well, if you don't give way to someone waiting to cross, they're saying it will be a driving fault. The DVSA call minors driving faults, and you don't fail for getting one driving fault or one minor. You have to get many of them. You can actually fail for just 2 really if they're bad enough, but you're allowed up to a maximum of 15. So it could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So it could contribute to a fail. But you may not get a minor even if you don't give way, because they're saying it does depend on the situation, following traffic. How easy was it to see the pedestrian? Did it look like they're waiting to cross? Now, what would cause a fail? As before the changes to the highway code, you will fail the driving test if someone has already started crossing the road and you fail to give way. But even then you may not fail. It depends on the situation. Driving examiners do look at the bigger picture. If someone jumped over the wall and legged it across your road and you had to slam the brakes on at the last second to avoid a collision, the driving examiner can't really expect you to anticipate that. As novice drivers, candidates are more likely to err on the side of caution, and this will be considered. So that's a final note there. They're saying driving examiners understand that new drivers tend to be a bit slower, take bigger opportunities and give way more. They allow for this a bit. I mean, you can't be really slow, you can't need massive opportunities, but they don't expect you to be a highly skilled, experienced driver. They just expect you to be safe and legal. You need to be safe enough that they trust you in a car on your own. Well, I hope this video helps. If you think it does, please give it a thumbs up. Check out Collingwood and Confused in the description. If you're learning to drive and want to insure yourself on somebody else's car, Collingwood can help, because you can do so without affecting their policy. And at the moment, via the link, there's up to 35% off and a £20 Amazon gift card. If you're insuring your own car, check out confused.com. You fill out one quote form and get loads of quotes back to compare who's cheapest, and you can change your car on that quote as many times as you like to see how much it costs to insure different cars. Using the links doesn't cost you anything, but it does support the channel, so thank you very much. Subscribe to get my future videos, and until the next one, cheerio.